Smooth Productions.
And before we get into your time in Kosovo and Guantanamo, you were stationed in Germany first, correct? That was your first deployment?
Yeah, that was my permanent duty station. I wanted to go overseas. I wanted to go to Europe specifically, because my mother's European and I'd been before, and I like her family. I'm actually pretty close with them. I enjoy the culture. I wanted to get away. I was young. I was 22 years old. I was an Army officer, and I was getting paid. And I was living in a beautiful country, and the exchange rate was in my favor, and it was, we would train hard, we would deploy a lot, but when we were home, it was, I could be in Prague in 2 hours. I could be in Munich in 4 hours. I could just take, weekend trips to all these different cities and see as much of the world as possible. So I had decided, when I was selected for the infantry, that I wanted to go to the 26th Infantry to be a Blue Spader. And luckily I got that exact assignment. And when I got there, the Army pulled, its first great joke on me, and that it managed to immediately deploy me to a country that I learned about when I found out I would be going there. And that country was the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, as it was called then. This is right at the tail end of the Bosnian Wars, and there was the threat of possible expansion to the south. Macedonia is south of Yugoslavia and north of Greece, so that's basically where many of the migrants that have been coming out of Syria and through Turkey did their land march en route to Germany or whatnot. So I felt had a great deal of sympathy for those guys, because I've walked those mountains in the winter and it's terrible. So I followed the migrant crisis very greatly. We were there with the United Nations. So when we were there, we wore blue UN all caps. We didn't carry a magazine in our weapon. And when we patrolled, our rifles were slung. So we were peacekeepers. We were on there to keep the peace.
Yes, because I was about to say that is because it was a quote unquote a peacekeeping mission. And there have been reports about how intelligent that was. Could you tell us some of the experiences you had in Kosovo and how it being a peacekeeping mission affected that?
Well, Kosovo initially was not a peacekeeping mission, but Macedonia was. So that there were two separate deployments we're talking about. Macedonia was the United Nations Preventative Deployment Force, and it was Americans and a bunch of Scandinavian countries that actually had peacekeeper trained peacekeepers was something that their military had. Instead, they sent trained warfighters, the infantry, to be peacekeepers over there. In that case, it was a good mission. It was effective, but it ended the minute that NATO started bombing Kosovo, and that changed. NATO took the assets that the UN had and reallocated when we invaded Kosovo, we went back to the base camp that we had left in Macedonia and went across the border from there. So that was with NATO. We were carrying, a full combat load of ammunition around in the chamber, with rules of engagement in effect.
And these were two different deployments for you, correct?
Yes.
And were there, and during your first deployment, And Macedonia, you were there as a peacekeeper, right?
Yes, that was our job.
And what were and some of the what were some of the challenges and some of the things you saw as being a peacekeeper, and how was that? How did that affect your mentality from normal combat situations?
Well, some of the outposts that the UN had established up on to watch the border, we did a lot of that, just making sure that Serbian military did not come across the border into Macedonia. We were there to prevent that. But we didn't have enough assets to fight them. And there were some cases where, I had 14 guys sitting on an outpost, and 1,000 meters away was a Serbian mechanized brigade, 2,000 men with tanks. And I've got a cliff's edge behind me. And I'm like, tactically, this is horrible. I don't have any anti-tank missiles. I've got small arms. If these guys want to knock me off of this hilltop, I'm done for. So that was frustrating as well. At least in Kosovo, we could be a little bit more aggressive, and we were.
And did you have any memorable encounters while you were in Macedonia?
Greatest thing about that place is it seemed like every stray dog in the country was at our outpost and our base camp, and they would go on patrols with us. They would pull guard duty for us. They would let us know if anything was happening. I would say that was the best thing about Macedonia. The dogs.
And when you left Macedonia and went back to Germany, did you ever expect that you'd be going to Kosovo?
We were. It was being talked about as the Kosovo. The fighting there started while we were in Macedonia, so we could. I mean, we could see the Serbian military and special police units, maneuvering, and every once in a while we'd hear explosions. If they were close enough to us, so we were already thinking about it, and at the time. The 26th Infantry was the most deployed unit in the entire army. The guys had been in Bosnia many times. They actually protected Hillary and Chelsea Clinton when she went to Bosnia and got, and when she said she got shot at. Those were my guys.
That was your unit directly?
Yes. I didn't know it yet, but two of the guys who we've been reconnecting with were directly involved in protecting her while she was there. Pretty wild, huh?
That story probably, where she was dodging bullets, probably
enraged me.
Yeah. But that's a different story. We can try to get to that later. And your time in Kosovo itself, what was that like?
Well, we were kind of annoyed that we were going because we had just gotten back. We were gone. We were in Macedonia for 6 months. We came back. We were at home station in Germany for 6 months, and we spent half of that time retraining to go back to our wartime mission, which was still in 1999 to defend the Fulda Gap to prevent Russian armor columns from breaking into the southern German flank. That was still what we were training to do, was to fight the Russians in 1999. I just mention that because it's relevant with what's going on with this election cycle and what we're doing with the Russians. We got over it because we felt that we were the best unit, and this was just the Army agreeing with us. The entire invasion force was packed around my battalion task force. So we got We added a company of tanks from an armor battalion. We added, we absorbed an entire artillery battalion and, other assets. And ultimately, we had elements of, from the Navy. We had a Naval Mobile Construction Battalion, the Sea Beast, that came to build our base camp. And we weren't sure if the Serbs were going to fight us or not. We didn't know. So back then, when we were going into action, we would paint camouflage on our faces. So we went across the border and load up. Luckily for us, the Serb army decided not to engage and withdrew. We encountered them from time to time, but never exchanged any fire with them. Our immediate task was to disarm the Serbs and prevent them from committing genocide, and also to look for evidence of genocide. And we found them. The problem was that once we took the power away from the Serbs, the ethnic Albanian Kosovars started to get their retaliation. So one day we were protecting Kosovars from Serbs in one part of our sector, and the next we were protecting Serbs from Kosovars. This is generally things like this would happen. Slobodan the Serb would, live down the street from Ishmet the Kosovar. Families probably lived next to each other for 100 years. Well, they hate each other now. So Slobodan goes down into his basement and gets a hand grenade that probably was airdropped by the United States to the Serbs to fight the Germans in the 40s. He puts it in his kid's hand. He pulls the pin, says, run down and throw it in Ishmed's yard. So the kid would throw it. Grenade would go boom. We'd hear the explosion. We'd launch a quick response team. We'd roll up to the location, and we'd get there just in time for Ishmed to be coming out with his family armed to defend himself. So he's not going to shoot us. We're Americans, but we're going to take his guns, and we're going to search his house, and we're going to disarm him. So what do you think happened to that guy after we showed up and disarmed him?
More than likely, there was a retaliation against that family.
Yeah.
Unfortunately slaughtered.
They would be on our patrol route, but, this would happen over and over and over and over again, and we just could not keep an eye out for everybody. And when we weren't coming around anymore, the next one time we'd show up, and they're dead. And this was happening across the country.